DHG here, getting into my review. It's been a long time coming, of Horizon Forbidden West. Now, this is a game that I didn't really get into all that much at first. I eventually ended up completing it, but for various reasons I had a very hard time getting into it. But here it is, my review. Since it's finished, it's taken me a couple months to try to put into words what I thought about the game. So I'm going to start off in basic format with my pluses, my minuses, my equals, things that are neither here nor there. They're just part of the game, whether you want to consider them pluses or minuses. It's up to you. The best graphics on the PlayStation 5, easily. Yeah, this had ray tracing, a couple other elements involved, very good uses of HDR, which the first game, Zero Dawn, was one of the first PS4 games to use HDR, back when that was still a new thing. And back then, I didn't really know what HDR did. I mean, if you were to put the game side by side with one that didn't use HDR, I wouldn't have been able to tell, but now it's plain as day. So used to playing games with HDR, it looks terrible without them. This makes very good usage of all the assets of the Decima engine which it uses. Out of all the games I played on PS5, this is easily the best looking. Now you have a couple different options, however you want to play it. There's a super high performance mode where you can play at, I believe, 120 frames per second plus. There was also I think it was a 1440p 60 frames per second mode, which probably wasn't set to 1440p. It was probably a dynamic, goes up and down depending on how much stuff's going on. And then there was a 4K with all the bells and whistles thrown in, 30 frames per second mode. Now I chose to play on that mode because the 30 frames per second it was persistent. There are some games that are locked at 30 frames per second that they just don't feel right. Then there are other games where, I mean, you could tell it's not as responsive as a 60 frames per second game, but it also doesn't feel that bad. They keep it consistent at 30 the entire time. They did 30 frames very well in this game, so I thought, I might as well just play it on this. Another plus, fun gameplay, good mechanics. Yeah, taking down behemoth monsters with what you could call, for the most part, you get some pretty bombastic stuff later on, but rudimentary weapons is always fun. Some of the monsters you take on are giant mechs like T-Rexes, all based off of natural animals, natural shapes, like tortoises, T-Rexes. What were some of the other ones? Pterodactyls, I think. One you eventually get to mount, which I'll get to later on. But the gameplay is always fun. It can really be a challenge to take down some of these larger machines. Not always saying that in a good way because of something that's in the negatives here. Good combat. Ranged is great primarily. Melee combat is okay. I felt that they tried to do a little bit too much with the melee combat in this game. There was a lot of extra controls, a lot of nuance put into it that I mean, maybe some players would get into that. I didn't care for it. I thought there was enough to make the combat fun just in the ranged arena alone with the projectile-based weaponry. I don't remember that being a thing in the first game. You had your basic strikes, fast strikes, heavy strikes, but in this they really expanded into a whole lot. I almost tried to make it like a melee combat game too. I didn't care for that, but the ranged combat was very good. The story is good, although it wasn't as good as Zero Dawn. I really liked what Zero Dawn did. It had a very anti-transhumanist, I would say technology message, like dangerous uses of technology. Like as we're getting into the age of artificial intelligence and automation. Just like nuclear energy, it can be used for good or it can be used for bad. Obviously, we use nuclear energy for good reasons, but you can also make a bomb out of it. You can do some nefarious things with artificial intelligence and automation too, like you can put billions of people out of work with robots. Robots that produce the other robots, and then where are the humans thrown in here? Well, they're no longer needed as a unit of production. Combine that with the Malthusian ideals that the elites have, then you could just see them doing another mass calling of humanity. But I didn't feel that this story rises to the heights that Zero Dawn did. In fact, it kind of felt cliche in the way that they laid it out there compared to the first. Because the first was a blank slate. You didn't know where they were going to go with it. And the end of it, I would say the last 4 or 5 hours of the game was really, really edge of your seat, really good. This one, they let you know who the enemies are, and you kind of have like the big final battle scene, which was really cool, but then they open another can of worms, which leaves it open for another sequel with an even bigger enemy, and it's like, oh my god, could you be more cliche? Not everything has to be an end of the world scenario. But overall, I thought the story was good, just not as good as Zero Dawn. I suppose you could view this as a plus or something that's neither here nor there, but I like getting a lot of value for my money, and value can be defined in many different ways. It could be, which my standard golden rule is, an hour of gameplay for every dollar I spend on the game. Pretty reasonable, especially considering that money's getting tighter. But I think I played how many hours in this game? Maybe about somewhere between 80 to 120. I can't really remember, to be honest. But I didn't even do all the side quests, and I didn't even bother unlocking all the items you could unlock. In the very first game, I did. I unlocked everything there. Got the platinum on it, and it took quite a while. This one, I wasn't going to do that. But if you want to, the option's certainly there. They put a ton of content into this game. This kind of goes into something I was saying. Another plus. The main story warns of the dangers of the abuse of technology, especially artificial intelligence. I've already spoken about that. No need to elaborate on that further. Now we're getting into some of the things that I felt were just things I'm calling out. They're not really pluses or minuses. It's all entirely subjective here. The entire thing's entirely subjective, but I could see how some people can view these items as more, however you choose to view it. It's got an extremely large world. I personally don't care for gigantic worlds in games. I see them as a waste of space most of the time. A perfect example of this would be go back and play any of the Just Cause games, especially Just Cause 4, which was massive. You go from point A to point B to point C, and it's mostly just wasted space. I don't know why it's there. It doesn't serve a purpose other than just to be big and say, we got a large map. This game gives you some shit to do on the map, so it's not entirely wasted space, but I also felt that it was kind of large in comparison to the content too. It does make usage of most of what's on the map though. Side quests are all very similar. Yeah, the side quests have to do with the next two things that are neither here nor there, but yeah, a lot of the side quests, they were all like, oh, I can't be bothered to go do something myself. Aloy, can you go do it? And I might as well just throw this in there since I'm going to start bitching about it anyway. The side quests are at odds with the finite time main story. In the main story, you're up against a race against time. I think the timeline was 6 months or something like that. Meanwhile, everyone you run into in every single town and every single settlement can't be bothered to get up off their ass and do anything for themselves. So they tell you to go fetch something for them, or go do this, or go pick up this item from somewhere, or go find somebody that happens to be dead, or maybe not dead, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's content, it gives you something to do, but I kind of wish that they would have been a little bit more creative. And I could name a couple other games that do side quests in a much, much better way. Witcher 3 was very good with its side quests. I think The Witcher 3 should be the standard bearer for how you're going to approach side quests in the game. This felt like side quests from like a different era. Just very rudimentary. Fetch quests, shit that people make fun of. Even Hideo Kojima notorious for trolling his players in Death Stranding. They had a side quest in that game where it's literally a pizza delivery mission, which is a term used to describe all these take an item from point A to point B and call it a quest. You get a lot of those in here. They're not always that simplified, but they're there nonetheless. There's lots to unlock. If you go into the item menus with all the different items you have, if you want to upgrade your weapons to the maximum potential, you're going to spend a lot of time finding these items, and I did quite a bit of them. I didn't do all of them, just the ones that I used. And it took me quite a while just because the parts don't always drop. There is a bit of a random number generator incorporated here. I found this most with, I think it was the Apex Heart from the Thunderjaw. It took me, I don't know how many hours to find that one, but it just never seemed to drop. I don't know if there are any other items in the game that other people had problems with, but that one was the most troublesome for me. That son of a bitch would never ever drop. But if you're looking to really unlock everything that's in the game, then you're going to be at it a while. Now we're getting into the negatives. These are my favorite parts to explain because I get to bitch and moan about the game. The main story portrays humans as things that can only destroy. Yeah, I didn't really like this. This was a really nihilistic, pessimistic take on humanity, where humanity doesn't build anything. Although at some points they do talk about some of the old art, I think, when pertaining to some of the different monuments and stuff that's scattered throughout, like especially part of the Tanakh tribes, when they talk about these giant machines that these old people built. But yet there's this own twist in the game where those very same things that they're idolizing, they were all built for destruction. They don't talk about anything like great waterworks, great monuments, great pieces of art, like, let's say, some of these old cathedrals that were built, like Leonardo da Vinci, some of the greatest minds in history. They don't talk about any of that, or the initial ideal concepts that went into the founding of some of the great countries like America, which this takes place in after it's destroyed. There's a very nihilistic, very, I would say, anti-human view towards the human race that's put forth in this game, which I find really unappealing. Men are generally bad, women are generally good. Now, this is a generality. You will find exceptions. But the way that this game portrays both men and women is kind of felt very feminazi in a way. That would be the best way to describe it. I didn't like it. I didn't care for it. There are some other games that did the same thing, which I think the most offensive of which would have to be The Last of Us 2, which also happened to be a Sony exclusive. They don't come outright and say it, but the messaging's there. This is something that bothered me the most, this one right here. The world felt very unnatural and fake. It was almost like the cast of characters was the diversity, equity, inclusion form of gaming. There was no racism, but yet everyone was still running around killing each other, dividing themselves into tribes. So I'm kind of thinking, alright, you want to create this utopian world where there's nothing that divides one person or another in terms of skin color, but yet people are separated into their own little tribes anyway. What did you accomplish? You just created a utopian world that has all the same flaws of the pessimistic world that you supposedly hate. When it comes down to it, people are going to be people. They're going to have their prejudices. You can work with people to try to expel those prejudices, or you could just dream up this weird fantasy land like they did with this game, which really doesn't conform to natural reality or objective reality. It's exactly that. It's a fantasy, and it's a bad one. The game has a slow start. Yeah, I had a very hard time getting into this. They show you the regular cast of characters that you see from the first game, like the Sun King, I can't remember his name. I mean, it's nice seeing the old crew again for a while, but the game just takes way too long to get going, and the unlockable progression is quite slow. I'll get a little bit more to that, because one of my biggest complaints, other than the whole DEI feminazi thing, was what you're seeing on screen right now. The game is a slow start. Oh, this happens to be my next talking point. The flying mount is awesome. I loved having this flying mount, but they don't give it to you until way later in the game, and I dive into these games not knowing the damn thing about them because I don't care. I want to go in with an unbiased view of the game, just remembering what was in the first game, if it's a sequel or if it's the first entry in a franchise, or what would be a franchise like Ghostwire Tokyo. I don't want to know anything. I don't care. I want to get into the game, form my own thoughts, feelings, and opinions, and then I'll put it in my review if it was good or bad. But the flying mount was such a good addition to this game because, I mean, the ground mounts that get you from point A to point B, but the flying mounts really let you explore the territory a lot more, and it adds up gameplay possibilities that weren't previously there. But I think I was playing this game for, oh god, about 80 hours or so, but before I unlocked the damn thing, and I didn't even know I was going to be unlocking it, which, for those of you that do have the foresight and the knowledge that you will be getting this thing at some point, you could put off all the side quests until you get the flying mount, and then do them, but then you're just rushing through the game, main story after main story after main story. I think that, I'm not saying they should have given you the flying mount in the beginning. That would have made no sense. That would have made exploration a little bit too easy and would have nullified other mechanics of the game, such as the climbing mechanic. Oh, yeah, shit, I forgot about that. I should add that in here. The climbing mechanic. I'll get to that next. But if you had a flying mount, why bother climbing up mountains, you know? And before I forget about this, the climbing mechanic. This thing, it was kind of based off of what Uncharted did. It's very similar. But I gotta say, trying to get Aloy from, what's the word? The gripping points that you grab onto. You could be right in front of, or right beside, or right below a grabbable ledge that you could mount and climb up onto. She just won't do it. Either that or she would jump right past it. I found the climbing mechanic in this game to be so goddamn frustrating that a couple times I just put my controller down and put it to, why do I bother? But if they plan on making a third installment of this game, and which they do because of the ending, you really got to work on that climbing mechanic. I mean, it's pretty good as it is, but Aloy just, it's almost like you're giving her suggestions instead of commands. And here's my last complaint about the game. You fight a lot of large enemies in this game. A lot of them. Fight a lot of small ones too. But mostly the big enemies are what you're going to remember. Like the T-Rexes. They're Thunderjaws. They all go by their own names, but they're all based off of some natural form. And you get other ones like I think one of the new ones in this game was some sort of a turtle-like robot that was obviously based off of turtles. But these bigger ones, like Rockbreakers, Thunderjaws, the thing based off turtles, they're such a pain in the ass. Their attacks will knock you off your feet, stun lock you basically. You can have your bow drawn, ready to shoot at them. They'll throw some sort of a ranged attack at you, and it'll cancel your attack. This happens constantly, and considering that a lot of the attacks in this game need to be charged before they can be initiated, or I shouldn't say initiated, they need to be charged before they can be finalized and put into action. It makes it frustrating, especially if you're trying to hit the weak spots to knock off components, to farm, to upgrade your equipment. You're just going to be beating your fucking head off the wall because you're constantly getting stun locked. This was one of the most annoying things I found about this game. That goddamn stun locking from the large creatures, or like the tortoise-like creature that goes in and up above the ground. Every time they surface, knocked off your feet constantly. It's like, for God's sakes, I wish you had some sort of a perk, because there's so many goddamn perks in this game. You think they would have thrown one in to give some sort of like a stun resistance or something, but no. Aloy's going to get knocked off her feet constantly. And so, the rating for Horizon Forbidden West. I thought about this for quite a while. I thought about it for months, actually, because I wasn't sure where to put this, all things considered, because there were some concepts in the game that I hadn't really wrapped my mind around yet. I'd have to say it's average. They could have done better with this game, a lot better. They did some areas exceptionally well, but it kind of seems like they tried to do too much, almost. And on the things that they did do, they still had some flaws within the system, like the stun locking, things like that, giving you the mount a little bit too late, or the, I would say, perverse and subversive ideologies. But they also had the stellar graphical presentation. They had mostly great combat. So it kind of put me in a weird place as to where I wanted to put this, but I'd have to say average, because, like I said, I had a hard time getting into the game at the start. It didn't really have a stellar beginning, whereas other games, such as I was mentioning a game earlier in the review about a game that really just starts off the game well and with a superb start. A game I just played through, Metal Gear Solid 4. It's an old one, but I just played through it. That game earned a great rating. That game's just perfect all around. But that was how you do a starting in a game. This one just slow, get it going very slow. I'm elaborating here, but yeah. Horizon Forbidden West, average.